Digital Foundry is proudly sponsored by the Logitech G935 headset.
This week, Red Faction Guerrilla arrives on Switch with an interesting port. With its mobile hardware, a physics-heavy open-world game seems like a difficult task, yet here it is, and it works fairly well. And to discuss this, I am joined by finally official full-time colleague, Alex Battaglia.
Thanks, John, and also thanks for the kind and warm welcome.
It is a pleasure to have you on all the way, full-time. Here we go. So we're going to kick this off with a little dual VO on a rather interesting little game. It is Red Faction Guerrilla.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to say this. Remastered. Yes, it's remastered. It is remastered, and it's on Switch. But we're also going to take a look at a previously released version, specifically the Xbox One X, PS4 Pro, and PC versions of the game. Since we never looked at them in the first place when they first released. And this one's interesting because it represents both the best you could imagine from a console version of this, but also possibly the worst performance we've ever seen. But that'll come up later. But obviously the focus here is on Switch. And you've played the other versions somewhat, but I've been focused on Switch, and the first impressions are interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there's multiple. I guess the thing to get out of the way first is that each and every version of this game has kind of multiple modes to select from, whether it's quality or performance. And obviously on Switch, that means you have quality performance both in portable and in docked play. And where do you spend most of your time playing, actually?
So yeah, this is the tricky thing, though. So I actually spent most of my time playing docked in performance mode, and that's mainly, I'll explain why when we get to the performance, if the name doesn't tell you something. But let's start with some resolution stuff here. Let's just get this business out of the way. Mm-hmm. So the Switch version is an interesting beast. It does default to performance mode, and in that mode, I have detected a dynamic resolution. The lowest I saw, and it might go lower, but the lowest that I could find personally was 792p, but it often spikes back up to 900p in this mode, so it sort of bounces between them. And again, you know, worst case scenario, it might go lower than that, but I haven't seen it myself, so I think that's kind of where you're at normally. Now, if you jump over to quality mode, it does seem to just sort of sit at 900p as far as I could tell, but I guess the main difference there is that when you switch to quality mode, you get increased detail at a distance, so the LODs are pushed out. You get ambient occlusion, our good friend, and a few other tweaks like that. Sort of the visuals are more refined and higher resolution overall, and they introduce a 30 frames per second frame rate cap. So that's kind of the quality performance in docked mode. But then there's portable, and this is a little more interesting, so for me at least. So when in quality mode in portable, you get 576p. Again, this dynamic res stuff is really tiresome sometimes, but it does seem to stick at 576p as far as I can tell. But that's not the case in performance mode, where it can drop down to like 360p when the screen is filled with particles and effects and buildings are falling over. So, and again, it's uncapped frame rate in performance mode. It's capped at 30 in quality mode. So that's kind of the basics there.
Did you just say uncapped performance as in up to 60?
Up to 60, yes.
Oh, okay.
So not completely uncapped, but they're aiming for 60, and it does get there in the other versions, but, well, we'll see when we get to the performance. So that's the main thing on Switch. Now, the other things that this version, so this is it's a remastered version of Red Faction Guerrilla, right? So
yeah.
But having looked back at the original version, I don't feel like it's that significant a jump. So they definitely did things like they reworked some of the textures. So those are newer, higher quality. There's improved specular maps and such like that. They improved the shadows. They added sort of the crepuscular rays into the console versions, which were always an option on PC, but were not present on PS3 or 360. And they made a couple other tweaks to some of the post-processing effects and things like that. So
yeah.
The thing is it doesn't always look better than the 360. I think overall it probably does, but there's certain scenes where you're like, I kind of prefer the texture work in the original version, which is often kind of the case with I guess, ports like this where they sort of revamp the art. But, overall, I do think it's an improvement over the 360 original, especially in terms of performance.
And that's the thing. If you look at the Switch version, like you were just describing right now, even, taking portable aside, if you look at the docked performance, or at least the docked visuals, you're getting something that was better than you saw on the last gen consoles, almost no matter what you do in that case, which is a big thing to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's interesting about this game. It is a very heavy game in terms of physics and very impressive in that all structures are pretty much destructible. You can knock them down. They do apply some physics to it. They come apart in chunks. All of these things, it was actually fairly well threaded on the PC as well, which is impressive for a game from that era.
It was like rocked my Q 6600 out at the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the thing is, though, is this isn't necessarily super well suited to the ARM CPU and the Switch. This isn't really a super mobile-friendly game. So I can absolutely understand that even though this is an old game, this is a very challenging game for the Switch.
It wouldn't be the first time that we've seen larger, more, I would say, open world or games that have intense physicalization having more problems on the Switch than others.
Exactly. But before we get to the performance stuff, which is really the most eye-opening, I did want to at least touch on the other consoles, at least the Pro and the X. So I decided to check these out since we didn't look at them initially, and I'm pretty impressed, especially with Xbox One X. So that, again, quality and performance modes. When you're in quality mode, it runs at native 4K, and it is capped at 30 frames per second, and it looks fantastic. But the performance mode, then, is still pretty good. It seems to be 1800p. There might be dynamic res in there, but I wasn't actually able to find any. It just seems to stick at that. And it goes for a target of 60 FPS, which it does very well, as we'll see. Now, on the Pro, you also seem to get native 4K in quality mode, and then 1440p in performance mode. So they both look significantly sharper than on Switch. And even in the performance mode, they don't completely knock out some of those visual effects. Like, you don't lose ambient occlusion when you play in performance mode on Xbox or Pro, where you do.
It would be pretty interesting to see. Ambient occlusion is so ubiquitous nowadays. To see that be an effect that they would knock out for performance mode on a high-end console in 2019 or 2018 when this came out originally, that'd be pretty interesting. But no.
I agree. So thankfully they did not. So, but again, in terms of visual comparisons, honestly, it's relatively minor across the board. I mean, all the versions look very similar, except obviously when you go to the Switch performance mode, which loses a lot of those details. But again, it is what it is. Performance, though, this is kind of the big thing. This is where everything comes together. And the news on Switch is extremely mixed.
So, I guess the question is, which mode would you prefer to play based upon your mixed experience? Like, which one is the most stable of the two?
Yes, let's start with my favorite mode, which just happens to be portable in quality mode. This is the only mode that is mostly stable. So it's capped at 30 frames per second, and even though it is not perfect, it does get close enough to it. And seeing this on the Switch's portable screen, it looks pretty darn impressive for a portable game. I mean, again, this sort of open world destruction isn't something you'd expect to be playing on a handheld, and that actually did look nice, and it runs consistently. So that is a good thing. The issue, though, is when you do dock your Switch and you switch over to quality mode on docked there, yes, the resolution is boosted significantly, but suddenly there is a lot of frame rate issues. It really just can't hold 30 frames per second at all. Like, even just in this opening base area, it's not getting there. But when you go a bit further and you start blowing buildings up, as you do in this game, I saw dips as low as like 14 frames per second, which is really bad. That
actually sounds worse than the original Xbox 360 version that I've also played in the past.
Yeah.
I wonder if at the point they didn't make enough sacrifice to resolution at that point in time, because if it's already pushing the bandwidth limits of the Switch, when you throw out all these other alpha effects, it's just going to go kind of on overdrive and dip the frame rate way more than it needs to be. It makes me almost wish they had I guess, a quality mode that also had dynamic resolution at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Or that's kind of the issue. So quality mode in docked is not great. When playing in docked, then it's all about the performance mode for me, so I really don't like uncapped frame rates like this. I really do not. But compared to the very slow quality mode, this is kind of the only way you can play it. And yeah, the hit to visual quality and the more dynamic resolution does sort of save the day. And the average level of performance is a lot higher. I never saw anything close to that 14 FPS dip. It's always, mostly above 30 frames per second. So it's smooth enough to play. It doesn't run bad. It's just you're really never getting close to 60 frames per second. I mean, even if you go stand in the corner of the map and look at the floor or the sky, you're still not quite at 60. So it doesn't get there, which is why I feel they needed a sort of a global frame rate cap. Like in docked mode, I would want to play quality with a 30 FPS cap just to get a fluid experience, but you can't do it right now.
Well, I guess that's something to look for, maybe a patch, since this version is so recent and so new.
Exactly. And I should say that along those same lines, the portable mode when running with the performance mode is similarly unstable, maybe a little bit smoother overall, I'd say, but it's that same uncapped frame rate, not hitting 60. It's completely playable. It just doesn't look very smooth in action. So of all those 4 modes, I definitely have to go with quality mode in portable. And if that's the way you had planned to play it, mostly in portable, it's a nice looking version of the game.
Yeah, that kind of hits, I guess, the notes that we always see in a lot of Switch versions of games, where the docked experience may not look too great on a larger set. But the portable experience is the thing where it actually shines, where you can see the Switch's strengths come through, and you don't notice as many of the compromises to like visual quality settings or even at times resolution, I would argue, due to the small size of the screen.
Precisely.
But on the other hand, if you do have a 4K set, how is the performance then on Xbox One X and PS4 Pro?
Okay, so Xbox One X, now that is, if you have a console and you want to play Red Faction again, you haven't already done so, this is absolutely the way to go. This version did impress me. So by default, it's in performance mode. It's like 1800p. It looks good, and it runs really well. Like, it's not perfect. When you start exploding buildings again, you do get these momentary dips, but they use an adaptive VSync during this time. So it actually ends up feeling less severe, if you will. But honestly, that's really the only time I was able to drop the frame rate is when things are exploding, and it quickly pops right back up as soon as it's finished. So it's honestly not a huge deal, and it really feels very, very fluid while looking extremely sharp. So performance mode on X is generally very, very good, but not quite perfect. Now, in comparison, the 4K mode, as far as I can tell, that basically is perfect. That's a nice 30 FPS cap lock. I mean, again, it's 30 FPS, so it's kind of a hit to performance, obviously, but it's very, very stable, and it feels really nice.
And with no bad frame pacing.
Exactly.
Which is a good point.
Yeah, I should note on the Switch, the frame pacing is actually fine for the most part. But as we've seen before, when the GPU is stressed, it does start to throw in some 16 millisecond spikes,
which is such a weird thing to see.
So that's a little bit there. It doesn't happen at all in the X. So X version is the best console version by far. PlayStation 4 Pro then, the high-res quality mode. So this is a day that I did not think would ever arrive. So the Pro version actually manages to run worse than
Lichdom Battle Mage,
if you remember that one. But yeah, this actually might be the lowest frame rate I think I've ever seen on PS4 Pro. Maybe I'm forgetting something, I don't know, like Fallout 76 possibly ran worse than this, probably not, but this is really bad when the explosions hit. I mean, it's really bad. This is not the kind of thing that you normally see, and it's very strange.
I mean, it would be pretty strange to see resolution parity between the two larger consoles and not see a difference with the Pro unless it was already tapped out. I mean, we've seen in the past that there's been situations where the Xbox One X version of a game is surprisingly more high res than the PS4 Pro version of the game, just due to the kind of imbalance in the PS4 Pro's design, with having obviously a greater upgrade in compute power between its older sibling in the PS4 but having less available bandwidth in comparison. It didn't upgrade that as much, so it can struggle. But at the same time, you have at least that performance option. And how does that run?
Yeah, so there's actually 2 performance options on the Pro, which is interesting. So if you're outputting at 4K, you get, it looks like 1440p, and it runs reasonably well. So in the action scenes, it does kind of hang below 60 FPS, so it's not that smooth. So, during traversal or just moving between the map, you do pretty much get 60 FPS, but like in this scene again with the destruction, it generally hangs below it. So yeah, it's a lot slower than Xbox One X's 1800p mode. But if you set your TV to 1080p output, which is how I did a lot of the capture, just to save space on the capture SSD, the frame rate is actually quite stable. I mean, you do get the dips when explosions happen, but they're less pronounced than any other version, and it feels really consistent. So if you play 1080p, you are getting the smoothest console version, but at the expense of image quality. So obviously it looks significantly worse than the Xbox One X version or PS4 Pro itself at higher res.
So it's kind of a hidden performance mode just by having setting your resolution through the PS4.
Exactly.
I kind of like that is an option, but it would be great if such things were made more transparent at times.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree. And that's always been a problem with the Pro. But there is one other thing I want to mention real quick. I briefly fired up the PC version of Remastered. And first of all, I immediately discovered that yes, there is a frame rate cap, and that frame rate cap seems to be 250 frames per second.
Yeah,
because that's exactly what my PC jumped right up to. I'm running at 3840 by 1600, so an ultra wide mode.
That's amazing.
Crank up the details, and we're just cruising along at 250 frames per second with the VSync disabled there. And it's, when you come from the console versions and you suddenly you play at 250 FPS. With the mouse and keyboard, the responsiveness of it,
it's just absurd at that point in time.
It's absurd.
Obviously you have an excessive PC, but it says quite a lot that you had such low GPU and low CPU utilization when playing at 250 FPS. That even on a more moderate machine, like let's say with an RX 580 or a GTX 1060, you would be very secure in playing at extremely high frame rates at extremely high resolutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The game is not demanding on the PC. It screams.
Old PC.
But that's kind of the main thing here. I mean, I could also touch on loading times briefly, but none of them are that fast, to be honest. But once you're in the game, it's relatively seamless, so really it's not a huge problem. But yeah, overall, the Switch version is being the newest version. That's kind of the one I think a lot of people are going to look at. And yeah, it's pretty impressive in portable mode, but only in portable mode.
Yeah.
The portable mode and quality mode, portable quality mode, if you will, is very decent. But most of the other modes, it's not really the way I'd want to play the game, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's fine in performance mode in the sense that, it's smooth enough to be playable, but it's very unstable. And as such, you kind of have to know for yourself whether that's acceptable.
And it just aligns with our expectations of the Switch as a device, as a low-powered portable machine that will get, back ports or forward ports of games from this generation or the previous. And it's really best usually in portable mode. And I think that's basically where the Switch's audience is well, and I think it fits very well.
Yeah, and as usual with the Switch, you have to come at this from two sides. From the terms of the consumer, I don't think it's an amazing port, but when you actually consider what the developers have had to achieve here, knowing how limited the Switch is, in that sense, it's actually quite impressive. And again, older games are not necessarily well suited to the Switch hardware, right? A lot of techniques and improvements and optimizations have been done with modern rendering and modern engines to better support this sort of mobile hardware. And a lot of these older engines, they're just not made for this kind of device. And so it actually, as far as I can tell, it becomes quite challenging to achieve smooth performance in these cases. And it's pretty clear that they really had not the easiest time bringing this over to Switch. So, but I will say it's not as impressive as the port that the same company, Kaiko, did with Darksiders War Mastered. I can't believe they did this.
War Mastered.
Remastered,
Yes.
War Mastered. So, I don't even know. But either way, they did a good job on that. They also did a pretty solid job on this in terms of technically pulling it off. They didn't work on the Saints Row 3 port, which was absolutely awful on Switch.
Yeah.
Just terrible, terrible conversion. But again, those developers also faced some pretty steep challenges. So this kind of sits in the middle. It's not as good as Darksiders, but it's a lot better than Saints Row. And the other versions are pretty good overall.
And it's a really great game. I mean, I don't know what's the future for Red Faction is, but I hope we see it come around next gen when we have CPUs that can really, make something better than even Red Faction Guerrilla.
Yeah, exactly.
But
we need more of this. But I think that's kind of wraps it up for now.
John.
So I think I will slam this recording down with a large hammer and maybe toss some explosions on it. But before we do that, I should say thank you for joining me.
Of course, John. Thanks for having me.
And if you did enjoy this crazy video, if you can call it that, maybe I should do a remastered version of this video someday. I don't know. But be sure to like and subscribe and all that. And, of course, ring the notification bell at the top to get updates, and including if we do a remastered version of this video. And, of course, follow us on Twitter so I can stop talking about Red Faction. So, no, it's good stuff. Take care, guys. And until next time, this is John and Alex signing off.
Respect so pot. Featuring 2.4 GHz wireless, 50mm Pro G audio drivers, and DTS Headphone X 2.0 surround sound technology under the hood, the G935 headset delivers the ultimate wireless audio solution for gamers, whether you're playing on PC, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, or mobile. Order yours today from Logitech G.